Hello everyone, this is Genuine Polish. In this video, we're going to be going over the composition of the different starting worlds, so you know what to expect when you're starting your next world, and you can kind of think ahead on what traits you're going to want, so that way you can balance your starting resources. So an important thing to note is the way I got this information. I couldn't really find a good resource online, so I just generated each of the worlds a couple of times. I tried to shoot for 5, but with how many planets there were towards the end, I was getting down to like 3 for planetoids. So I ranked the resources based on what was available. For the planets that have to have traits, I just picked small boulders, so you might see an influx of building materials where otherwise you might not, depending on what traits you get. But I tried to do very neutral, small boulders on all the planets, so that way I could get a pretty accurate representation of what minerals were there. So there are some materials that can show up, but won't always, or didn't more often than not on average based on my test. And those aren't going to be included in the ranking. And then as far as the ranking goes, it's just done in composition based on percentage of the total planet. So it's not based on sheer number or sheer kilogram. And a lot of the difficulty from these later worlds comes from their small size. And if you want to know how to change the size of the worlds in the smaller clusters so that way they feel more like the larger asteroids, you can check out my video on that. That's going to be linked at the end of the video. And with that, let's get started. So first up, we have the Terrania cluster. It has an ideal survival chance. That's just because it's so well balanced. You have up to 5 different metals and almost all the basic building materials on this planet. So you can really prioritize what you use your different materials for. You don't have to go to other planets really to build a giant base. It does have a pretty good amount of algae and slime, and a good amount of water and polluted water, and you usually have quite a good selection of geysers on your planet. So for the most part, resources are not hard to come by on this planet, and it makes sense why this is the starting and most ideal survival chance out of all the different planets. So as far as resources go, we have our categories of from bottom to top of high, medium, low, scarce, and then very scarce. The only reason why I included the very scarce category is because out of all my random tests, these are resources that kept showing up, but they were in such low quantities that they were basically negligible. So from the bottom, we have igneous rock, which is the highest concentration of material on this planet. And then we have a lot of our basic building materials in the medium category. We do have copper, water, and polluted water, which are super important. And for a lot of these planets with magma cores, magma's in the medium category because there's such an overwhelming quantity of it. What's important to note about these first few starting planets is a lot of these planets will have an asteroid of uranium on the planet just to get you started down the research tree. And then we have refined iron in the very scarce category because it almost always shows up in the biome just above the core. So next up is the Folia cluster. The survival chance for this one is also ideal. There's a little less resources, but because you can pick up to 4 traits, it's actually, in my opinion, a little bit easier to survive on this planet than other planets. It does have a pretty good variety of metals, but it's lacking a little bit as far as water and polluted water goes, so you might want to consider taking the subsurface ocean trait. And because of its low algae slime content, you might want to get the slime modes. And if you're worried about heat, go ahead and take the frozen core if you can manage to roll that one. And then, like always, geodes and crash satellites, metallic rich are all really good traits just to pick on any world if you can get them. Again, we have igneous rock as the most common material on the planet. And then we have copper and rust in mediums, which is awesome to have metals down there. But again, like I mentioned before, we have water in the low category and polluted water in the scarce category. So actually, off the bat, on this world, it's a little bit more difficult. I do tend to find that this world seems to have more geysers than the Terraria cluster, but it might just be that I haven't played this world enough to really experience it. I do know you can find the exact number in the game folders if you really cared to. Cool things to note about this one is that the refined iron is actually, I put it down in the scarce category because you can generally find a couple of 1,000 kilograms of iron in this world, which is enough to get you started on space exploration, which is super cool. Alright, next up we have the Quagmiris cluster. So the survival chance for this one is ideal. If you haven't played this one before, the gimmick of it is there's a lot of mud and polluted mud floating around, and you have to convert that into dirt and polluted dirt so that way you have resources for farming and in oxygen production. So I find this world to be actually relatively easy. I would say the biggest issue is heat. So for this one, I'd recommend taking like the frozen core or ice glaciers. Either one of those traits would be great. And then of course, if you can wing it, some metal rich or crash satellites are always excellent ones. So for this one, the highest concentration, again, is igneous rock. It's pretty common for these first 3. There is a lot of mud. There's just a lot of organic material. There's a lot of mud and dirt and polluted dirt. just everywhere on the map, and a lot of polluted water. So as long as you get some filtration going, which is a little bit tricky for this one because it usually lacks a good quantity of sand, so you're going to have to get the rock crusher going and use some of that precious building material to make sand, so that way you can filter out all the polluted water. Next up, we have the metallic swampy moonlit cluster. So for this one, it's pretty similar to the Quagmiris cluster in that there's a lot of mud and dirt floating around. There's a lot of organic mass that you just got to find a way to filter and make into useful material. So for this one, it actually has a high concentration of polluted water. Like, this world is flooded with polluted water most of the time, and then it has a pretty good concentration of granite. So it's a little bit different than the other previous ones with the igneous rock. There's a lot of gold on this one and a lot of slime. So this one is just a wealth full of organic resources and metals. It's actually, I would say it's a pretty easy world compared to the other moonlit clusters that we're about to take a look at. For this one, again, you could really just go with anything. I like to take metal rich if I can. I haven't found heat to be a big problem on this one, so you can go ahead and just avoid trying to get a frozen core or icy glaciers. In my opinion, crash satellites are always pretty excellent sources of radiation early on in the game, so you might want to consider taking crash satellite, geode, metal rich, and then if you really want, you could do volcanic activity if you're feeling gutsy. Next, we have the Desolands moonlit cluster. So the survival chance for this one is moderate. So this one's pretty interesting because it actually has a decent distribution of materials, and they all kind of fall in the mid-range. So there's nothing that's extremely abundant, and there's nothing that's very scarce on this planet. So for this one, you have a lot of basic building materials like sandstone, granite, and igneous rock. And then you have usually a lot of gold, a good supply of gold, and phosphorite. Weird thing, I don't know why you have so much phosphorite on this planet, but generally a lot of the seeds tend to roll you with a bit of phosphorite. There's a good supply of water on this one, so this one's actually relatively, especially compared to the far right ones, nowhere near as difficult. For this one though, because you're lacking a lot of organic material, like there's hardly any algae on this planet, you might want to take slime molds just to help you out. And because this planet doesn't have a magma core, if you're someone that utilizes magma, you might want magma channels, but I would recommend trying to get a lush core if you can get one available. Like the previous planetoid, this only has 2 traits, so you got to be kind of choosy with which ones you choose. Next is the Frozen Forest Moonlit Cluster. I actually find this one to be relatively easy. It's a moderate difficulty, and again, you only get 2 traits for this one. So for this one, there's a whole lot of granite and rust floating around. So you actually have a pretty good source of oxygen right off the bat, converting that rust into oxygen and chlorine. And then there's generally a pretty good supply of aluminum ore, which I like because of its high thermal conductivity. And because it's frozen, there's plenty of ice to go around. So for this one, really it's just up in the air what traits you prefer. I always like to take metal rich, but you might even want to get slime molds. For this planet, there's very little algae and slime actually. So you might want to get slime molds if you're very reliant on algae. Again, for this one, the main way you should be producing oxygen is using rust. So if you don't like that, or if you need algae for other processes like to make artificial tiles, then you're going to want to get the slime molds for sure. Next up, we have a fun one. It's the Flip Moonlit Cluster. So I actually haven't really played on this one myself, besides doing just a couple of tests. The survival chance for this one is slim, and the neat thing about this is that it has magma on the surface, and it actually has a huge amount of magma. I rated the magma content for this planet as high. The cool thing is, though, is that they do usually give you a little tube to get up to the surface, so you don't have to deal with magma just to get to the planetoid surface. There's generally a tube that's surrounded by abyssal light, so you can get up to the top. So again, for this one, a lot of its resources fall between the medium and low spectrum, but the amount of resources on just this planet are very limited. You'll have metals like copper, wolframite. There's a lot of the basic building materials, and actually this planet below the surface is actually pretty forgivable. It has a lot of water, a lot of the basic building materials, and sometimes you can actually get lucky and get a lot of algae. And again, if you're a big person that relies on algae and stuff to get you going in the early game, then you might want to get slime molds for this one. And it doesn't seem like you can get frozen core or subsurface ocean. If you could, that'd be pretty interesting to see how it actually generates. You can go into the game folders and force it to, if you'd like. I have a video that kind of walks into messing with the game files. If you're interested in checking that out, there'll be a link at the end of the video. Again, this planet has a massive amount of magma, too much magma. In the medium category, we have the water, sand, basic building materials, sulfur, ice. It's actually not a horrible starting planet. You just have to get past the surface. And finally, we have the Radioactive Ocean Moonlit Cluster. The survival chance for this one is slim, and as you might have guessed, this planet contains a lot of uranium ore. It is also very poor in organic material, so you're probably not going to find any algae or any kind of slime unless if you get the slime mold. So that's something to consider taking if you're relying on algae for oxygen production. This planet is a bit of a question mark because there is rust on here. There's not a good supply of rust, so you can use that for oxygen for the time being. There generally is a pretty good amount of water, so you're going to want to get a electrolyzer up and running pretty much right away. There's also generally a lot of salt water on this planet, which is great because then you can convert that into water and then get, provide more fuel for your electrolyzer. So for this planet, you're probably pretty set on building materials. There's generally quite a lot of granite and sedimentary rock, which this is one of the only planets that has a good supply of sedimentary rock, and you should have a good amount of igneous rock and dirt. It's just a matter of getting that organic material. So choose wisely for the traits on this. Alright everybody, that's going to be it for this video. If you like what I'm doing, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you have any suggestions for other videos, comment down below. If you have any questions or if I missed something, because there's a lot of information to cover in this one, and compiling it all, I know I kind of missed one or two things. So just let me know down below. Thanks for watching.